As you may have heard by now, Street Fighter VI has been officially revealed to the world after a couple of years of speculation about its existence. The brief 30-second teaser showed an older, more gruff Ryu, referred to as Hot Ryu by the fans, and a redesigned Luke, about to spar each other. The graphical fidelity is impressive, and a couple people might think it's a pre-rendered video, but I do not. I strongly believe the game will look like this, thanks to Capcom's impressive RE engine. About a week prior, Capcom put up a countdown webpage, which led a lot of people to go wild with assumptions, thinking that it might be Resident Evil or Monster Hunter related, or perhaps even Dragon's Dogma 2, which we all know in our collective gut exists, but hasn't been announced yet. But if you did even a little bit of research, you would know the countdown ended the same day as the Street Fighter V season final for Japan, which made the nature of the reveal much more obvious. Anyway, over the last 2 years or so, there's been a lot of rumors and gossip going on about the existence of Street Fighter VI, especially following the departure of Yoshinori Ono from Capcom in 2020. For those who don't know, Ono was a mainstay in the Street Fighter development crew for a long time, dating all the way back to Street Fighter Alpha in 1995, for which he was an uncredited sound programmer. Then he became a sound manager for Alpha 3, then sound producer for Third Strike, then he rose through multiple positions on non-fighting game projects until he finally became the producer and project manager for Street Fighter IV. He eventually became executive producer of the franchise, its brand manager, as well as the head of Capcom's consumer games development. After leaving the company, a lot of gossip came to light that he simply wasn't a very reliable leader, and if you look back at how Capcom treated their fighting game IPs from the late 2000s to the mid-2010s, it's easy to understand why. On top of that, it was also rumored that Street Fighter VI was pushed back an extra year because the new project leads wished to bring the game into a more satisfying direction than what was planned while Ono was still there. Again, this is just gossip, rumors, and hearsay. I have no personal connections to anyone in Capcom. I am only repeating what I've heard, so you don't have to believe me. Regardless, he absolutely still contributed a lot to the series. But all of this begs the question: has the Street Fighter team learned from their mistakes? Specifically, the mistakes made at the launch of Street Fighter V. It was 6 years ago as of right now, so details are a bit hazy, but I do recall the online betas being generally well received. But when the final product actually launched and everyone got their hands on it, well, it didn't really feel like a final product. In case you can't recall or simply weren't playing Street Fighter back then, let me refresh your memory. Launch Street Fighter V was embarrassingly lacking in offline content. There wasn't a proper story mode, or an arcade mode, or even a versus CPU mode yet. There were only brief character prologues that didn't even adhere to the usual multi-round match format. Trials also didn't do enough to really show off or explain any of the game's depth, and that's assuming you believe the game had any depth to begin with. And then there was survival mode. Boy oh boy was survival mode not popular. It was the only single-player content of any real significance, and it was just a chore to play through. Power-ups between rounds felt way too randomized, and the difficulty spikes were jarring. If you lost near the end of hard or extreme difficulty survival, which had 50 and 100 rounds respectively, then you were sent to the beginning again with absolutely nothing to show for it. It was a shallow time sink. Nothing more, nothing less. It was a horrifically bare-bones game. Some people in the FGC who were more competitive focused said offline content didn't matter, but that's nothing but pure tone deafness on their part. Casual players make up the vast majority of every game's success, and generally speaking, casual players care the most about two things: graphics and offline content. You need only look at NetherRealm games and their success to know that this is true. Street Fighter V was doing alright on the graphics side with the exception of a couple hideous characters, again, but it was totally humiliating itself on the offline content part. For a lot of people who bought the game to mostly play by themselves and sometimes with friends or family, with maybe the occasional online match, the game had damn near nothing to do, and lots of user reviews reflected this. Several months later, the game finally got a proper story mode as a free update, and in 2018, Arcade Edition came out, adding arcade mode and extra battle mode, while also giving every character a second V-trigger. It took 2 years for the game to get all this content that should have been there on day one, and that is not a great look. First impressions are important for games. If a game gets a reputation for being terrible at launch, a portion of people will be so soured on it, they won't care how good it becomes 2 years later or 4 years later, unless it looks like a totally different game from what they played during that first week or so. In some cases, the loyal few who stick around might end up subsequently burning themselves out before the game finally becomes good, and that's arguably even more difficult to come back from. Basically, this leads me to the point of the video. I really hope that Capcom learned their lesson from that first year or so of Street Fighter V. I want Street Fighter VI to launch with a lot of substantial and fun offline content for the casual players to enjoy. Because whether the more hardcore and competitive players are willing to admit it or not, sales made by these casual players are the backbone to a fighting game's success. I also want Street Fighter VI to launch with good netcode and a gameplay foundation that feels more varied compared to the early days of Street Fighter V, because it drew a lot of criticism back then for feeling as if it encouraged players to only focus on stubborn offense, making every character ultimately feel the same in practice because they all had the same goal of aggression in mind. It took 2 to 4 years for Street Fighter V to finally address all these shortcomings, and it would be very bad if 6 had to do it again. The worst thing a company can do after a botched launch of a game is follow it up with another, because it suggests total incompetence and inability to learn from previous mistakes. It's one thing to upset your player base, it's another thing to make them feel like their complaints were never heard to begin with. However, considering how good Street Fighter V has been looking for the last couple years, I think I would be surprised if Capcom managed to screw it up twice in a row. The most recent season in particular was very interesting, with the return of Dan, Rose, and Oro, the inclusion of Rival School's character Akira, and the introduction of Luke, who seems to be Capcom's hopeful new poster boy. I don't expect the starting roster for Street Fighter VI to be huge. I anticipate anywhere from 12 to 20 characters, but I think 16 will be likely. Judging by the teaser, I assume that Ryu will be the face of the old guard, while Luke will be the face of the new generation of fighters, which might include characters who debuted in 5, and perhaps characters we haven't seen since Third Strike, because I can't see the game not taking place after Street Fighter 3. It just seems like the only place left to go. I like the fact that bearded Ryu is now the default look for him, because it feels like a natural evolution of his design. He's always been a hobo, so now he looks even more like a hobo. I'm very interested in the graphical direction of the game because RE Engine has proven to be extremely versatile. It was used for Resident Evil, Devil May Cry, Monster Hunter, and even Ghosts and Goblins. It seems like the more cartoony aspects of the characters are still present, considering Ryu's extremely wide Chris Redfield torso and big eyebrows that go over his bandana, and Luke's forearms being as thick as my thighs. Seeing how they balance realistic detail with exaggerated proportions could be interesting, and so far, I think Ryu and Luke look totally fine. The transitions at the end of the trailer, where Luke and Ryu are splashed with a color and black-white brushstroke effects, respectively, leads me to believe this is how supers are going to be animated. The musical direction could head back to a hip-hop aesthetic, which would also be cool. I would still like to hear some jazz fusion in there as well, because when is jazz fusion ever not good fighting game music? The voice at the end of the teaser, saying the game's title, sounds like he could be the new announcer, and he sounds really good. Overall, I think the biggest point of contention out of everything this short reveal had was the logo. It's extremely basic, if I'm being polite. Extremely boring if I'm not being polite. It's just a stylized SF initials inside a hexagon, which of course has 6 sides, and more importantly, evokes a conscious relation to mixed martial arts competitions, which I'm pretty confident is a purposeful design goal. It's a very simple logo that's easy to print on things. Still, it's very unexciting too. Compared to the logos of past games, there's no color, no brushstroke effects on the font, and they even got rid of the Roman numerals. I understand and agree with the complaints from fans saying that it's boring and should be changed. Hopefully Capcom listens because there's plenty of time. I don't think anyone expects this game for around another year. But when all is said and done, the fact that the logo is the least appealing thing about the trailer says a lot. Kind of. It's only 30 seconds, but impressions are, so far, positive overall. The real test comes when gameplay is finally shown. The goal in this respect, other than having a variety of offline content, is to offer a system where players feel like they're able to truly play how they want. Obviously, I don't expect the game to be perfectly balanced on day one. That would be ridiculous. But I would like to see a game where any character, regardless of whether they're a Shoto, Zoner, Grappler, or anything in between, can be played with equal or near equal viability, both offensively and defensively, and every character feels like the best version of themselves. It sounds like a tall order, but I've been playing The King of Fighters 15 recently, and a lot of characters in that large roster really do feel like the best they've ever been. If SNK can do it, then so can Capcom. This concludes my thoughts on the Street Fighter VI reveal. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you around.